There we are. Okay. Yeah, it was the start video thing.
There. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you good and I can see you. Goodbye.
Go away, right? This is my interview.
Yes.
Oh, so how's it going today?
It's going well. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah, good. Is it sunny by you?
Pardon? Yes, it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Great. Well, let's get started.
Okay, that works for me.
All right. Why don't you just introduce yourself and maybe a little bit of background and how you got into rose mauling?
Okay, my name is Pamela Rucinski, and I live in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and I have been in not just rose mauling, but folk arts since 1974 when I started doing rose mauling. And it took off in a way I never dreamed and expanded to include Russian folk art, Swedish folk art, several kinds of Swedish folk art, many, many different styles of rose mauling, painting birds, traveling around the world to meet and teach people and learn. And one of the highlights, of course, is getting my gold medal from Vesterheim in 1995, and then taking a study tour to Norway twice. And then last summer, being awarded the American Scandinavian Foundation's fellowship to study folk art in Sweden. And that was really huge and just kind of a life-changing thing. So here I am, still learning, still having fun, still excited about doing all these things.
Great. I got chills when you were talking about that. Oh, that's so wonderful.
It's been, during this COVID, it's been a lifesaver, a
Yeah.
sanity saver,
Yeah.
because it gave me things I wanted to do and didn't have, would not have normally had time to do. So I was able to do, and that was really great.
Wonderful. One of the questions that Edie and I had come up with was, are Scandinavian pieces meant to be functional, or are they mainly just for decoration?
Actually, I think it's both. They began with a function back in the 17, 18, and 19, early 1900s. They all had, especially the woodenware, had functions, and even the Swedish, the two styles of Swedish wall paintings, the on linen, because they work was often dreary, and most of the folk art that we're doing now is based on peasant life, and so they didn't have stores. If they needed an axe, chances are they may have hewed their own handle and maybe bought an iron thing or resharpened one that was around for forever. So they reused, and then often their some of the things that they do, like their elbows, are part of their daily life, and they were used because they didn't have everybody didn't have their own plate and their own knife and their own fork. It was a communal thing, and but we no longer do those things. We don't use, sometimes we use wooden bowls, but we don't use them in the same way. We don't pour beer into a bowl. And many of us don't brew our own beer. The woman of the house used to do that, was often anyway. And so it's become decorative. But when I'm painting, I try and choose things that could reasonably be used if somebody really wanted to, although a lot of them are just purely decorative. And the wall paintings on linen and burlap and canvas were used to decorate their houses. It was a sign of prestige that they could afford to have it. Or in the late 1700s, early 1800s, the homes opened up. They got windows, maybe just one small tiny one. And before that, homes didn't have chimneys. So any cooking you did over an open fire made the house smoky.
Sure.
Once they had windows and chimneys, the houses could be cleaned, the soot could be somewhat cleaned off. And so they could brighten the house with painted cupboards. And most of the time, they only had 1 or 2 cupboards. The trunks that we use today, we use for storage, and they did back then too, but we also use them for decoration. So a lot of these things are a dual history. Depends on what you want to do with them.
Sure. Yeah. I think nowadays, and kind of our community just looks at it and they go, oh my gosh, I would never use that because it's so beautiful. I mean, and you wouldn't want to wreck it,
But when they were making the original artifacts, the point of the artifact was to decorate it and show a little prestige and give joy, make people happy when they see it. They weren't seeing it as an heirloom because it was the thing they were using now.
Sure, sure.
Just like we don't save the things we're using now because they're just ordinary. So some of the things that have come down have just been unbelievable. And you can see that some of the trunks, especially over time, they were not well cared for, which is why some of them are in such awful shape that they're even, any with really good painting left on them is amazing.
Yeah. How many have you seen? I guess what's the oldest thing that you've seen painted on?
I really don't think maybe something from the 1600s.
Okay. And was that when you?
It was actually, it might have been, oh, you know what? No, when I was in Norway and even in Sweden, we saw some things that date back to the 11 and 1200s, which is mind blowing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just really fantastic. And when you look back at the older things, you can see the growth in technique. And also just the material, part of that was driven by the technology of the time. In other words, when they first started, the kinds of paints that were available, which actually brings up why we went to Sweden to study this fellowship, because the artists that we are trying to emulate or are inspired by are not guild or fine artist trained. They are, for the most part, just amateurs. And they did it as a way of survival and to feed their families and keep their farms going. They were often farmers as well as painters. And so they couldn't afford fine brushes and special paints. They would use what was available to them. So in both Norway and Sweden, and we even have that here in the United States, but we walk over the ground and we don't think, oh, that yellow rock might actually be something that you could grind up and turn into yellow ochre or red ochre.
Mm.
Yes.
Wow.
You can turn the soot in your chimney into lamp black paint. And there's well-known dye called indigo. It's a plant, which with a lot of hard work, you can turn into a blue dye. But and that dye can be turned into a powder. So you can turn that into a paint, which is why the early paintings, whether they be on wood or on fabric or burlap or whatever, are very simple. They're usually often only 3 or 4 colors. And they had to grind them. They made their own brushes, and then they used whatever medium was available. Both Norway and Sweden were well known for growing flax, which is where linseed oil comes from. And so they didn't know the chemistry behind linseed oil. It wasn't used as much. What they were familiar with from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance was either egg tempera, using just the egg yolk mixed with water and your paints, or melted rabbit hide glue or just animal hide glue. So they would have used, when they slaughtered, they would use everything and they ate everything, which of course our sensibilities don't go with that. So they would use the hooks, they would not use the leather or the skin because they would tan that and turn it into something. But some of the sinews or other kinds of things and the bones, they would just throw it all into a big iron pot and let it boil away till it just completely dissolved. So that might be, I don't know, a week or more. And in fishing communities, they boiled down the bones, the scales, the skin of the fish if they weren't eating it or using it. And this became a glue, but a water-based glue. So they used that as well. So these were all things, some of them I knew a little bit, but when we were in Sweden, we learned a lot more about it and actually used the products. And they're so much fun to use and so different. But just the idea that back in the 1800s, in order to paint something, they would have to do all this work before they even got a design idea. It was very labor intensive.
Yeah, they couldn't just go to Michael's down the road.
Exactly. They often actually had the rest of the family involved. So some of the women might, for example, some of the brushes were made from the hairs on a cow's tail, or very specific parts of the animal's body because the fur there might have been softer or stiffer, depending on what they wanted in their brushes. And so maybe the women of the house may have bound the brushes, and the children might have ground or looked for some of the pigments. So it was actually a family endeavor.
That's cool. Man, could just
Yeah, it's just really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
And some of it to me speaks to our common humanity, that when you travel, and no matter where I've gone, I've always went to look at where the folk art is. What kind of folk art does this part of the world have? And sometimes it's not painting. It might be the women's embroidery, especially in Hungary and in Czech Republic, so, which is considered two of the best places to go for embroidery, crewel embroidery specifically. But there are other things. And it always shows that they took their everyday things and tried to make them beautiful, partly to make the task easier because a well-designed tool is easier to use. But also, if you're going to do something that is repetitious and boring, and you're going to do it for a whole day, once a week, you know, it's nice to have something beautiful to take your mind off the drudgery of the task and make it more fun to use.
Oh,
so that's what some of this is also.
That's so awesome. Let's see. Oh, so why does this type of art seem to mainly be done on wood, wood and fabric, opposed to like ceramic or?
I'm not really sure, not 100% sure, but just thinking about the country and their natural resources. Norway and Sweden, all the Scandinavian countries were blessed with lots and lots of wood, forests and forests and forests. And I'm sure they had clay, but you need more time to do pottery. You need an oven.
Right.
And yeah, and I'm not sure that a lot of these farms would have had that kind of thing. I mean, if you had somebody who, because when we were in Sweden, we were at a museum where the gentleman, the head of the family, was not only a farmer and a fisherman, but he mined ore, iron ore specifically. And from that, he melted the ore, made metal, cast a rifle. He did the whole thing from the iron ore in the ground and in the lake. It was in pellets in the lake that was nearby. From that pellet, he made a rifle. And he was well known. The king bought his rifles. So this idea of taking raw materials. But he was known far and wide. And so you would have few specialists and then others that were more ordinary. And because the bowls were used, and people didn't have a lot of metal things, spoons, and they didn't have forks either for a long time either. So a lot of it was wood-based, their whole economy and their way of life.
Well, that's,
So I
yeah.
think that's, yeah, that's part of it. And then like the wall paintings, those are leftover tapestries, leftover pieces of linen, or pieces that were no longer useful because they used linen and wool primarily for all their clothing. So, or their bedding. So once the pieces became too old to use for their original function, be it bedding or a dress or an apron or a blouse,
Mhm.
the painter turned it into something else. So you can't tell when you see pictures of the artwork, but when you go to the museums and actually look at the pieces, you can see where they wanted a really big wall hanging because that was what the person who ordered it wanted. So they would take several pieces of not even the same kind of weave, just same linen, and stitch them together. And you can see the seams. And the stitches are sometimes coming out. Or there might have been a hole. That one large piece of linen that is on the back wall from me, that is on the big wood.
Let's go look at it. I was gonna
Wood, yeah. That one has an enormous patch.
the long one.
Yeah, one over. Yeah, there. That has the one on top with the wood behind it.
Oh, this one.
The barn wood, yes. Okay, that has an enormous patch in the middle.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know. Once you look, you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually, I primed that and prepared it when we were in Sweden under the guidance of our mentor, and then we were able to take them home. And it took me so long to figure out how to use it so the patch would become part of a design and not just cut things off.
Sure.
And but you see this a lot when you're in the museum and actually looking at it. And we were able to go behind the scenes in some of the museums and learn and see some of the things that the conservators are working to restore. And we saw this all over. So I thought, no, this is what I want to do, something that shows how it was really done.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't a piece of canvas that you go to the store and buy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's partly one of the reasons I really love doing this, is that it gives me this complete control over the design, everything from start to finish. When I work on rose mulling with my wood, I get the wood from somewhere. So somebody has already given a shape, and I have to take my design and make it fit, or try to think of a design that uses that shape. When I'm doing something like this, this is called Swedish doll mulling, by the way. And it's like the national identity of Sweden.
Okay.
And this, I can do anything I want. And I can put as many coats of primer on. I can change the background color. It doesn't have to be pure white. Or I can use burlap and do the doll mulling often has that great big spray of flowers that is coming up from the ground. And that's biblical in nature, actually. And so then they based a lot of stories on their daily life, but primarily biblical stories or themes.
Okay.
The ones below, with the nativity scene, for example, where it's just a piece of burlap, that is actually potato sacking.
Oh,
And
okay.
that was also, yeah, and that just, I get so excited when I do that because the sky is the limit with that. And I'm known for having a lot of things in my design. There's not a lot of empty space. And when we were learning about this, they told us they filled every inch. They didn't like empty space. And I was like, oh, this is tailor-made for me. So, yeah, but this is a potato sack. It's actually from my husband's family farm. They grew potatoes, and they have a nice supply of burlap sacks that I wash 2 or 3 times so they're nice and clean.
Mhm.
And they wash remarkably well.
Wow.
And then I prime it, and I can choose the color of the background. And the point of this is it's called bonadsmalning. And It tells a story. It's like a tapestry, like the Bayeux Tapestry that tells the invasion of Anglo-Saxon England in 1066. The women in Sweden did a lot of tapestry weaving and telling stories through their tapestry. And so this is painting those stories. So they often had biblical themes, but they also had things about everyday life. There is a real small one somewhere that shows almost like a garden party. There's a fiddler and a man coming on a horse. Yes. And an arch to represent kind of like a garden. So you can see him outside, you can see the inside, and if you notice, there's not much blank space.
Mm-hmm. And what does the top
Right. And so, and by the way, the word malning means painting.
Okay.
So, and bonat actually translates as that's tapestry painting.
Okay. Let's
So,
see.
and when I'm doing them, because I'm trying to take inspiration from a specific tradition and trying to keep that tradition alive, I like to use traditional designs and motifs, and then sometimes change them up so that growth, that long skinny thing that's hanging there is a growth chart that my daughter asked me for our very first grandchild. Would I paint something for her because she didn't like the ones at the store? And so I ended up, I got this idea, and she wanted something that would last. And so, yes, canvas lasts a long time. And so I took themes from both birthdays in October, actually coming up, and they didn't name for the baby at first, and they didn't know whether it was a boy before he was born. And then the house in that picture and the cat on the roof is their house. I took other themes in the design. That was a lot of fun to do, and I've done 7 of them. So that's kind of a modern use of an old idea. And still using the old clothes and the flower themes.
Yeah. And these are actually from her? The numbers
Yeah.
on them?
Yes, the numbers are for the height, and at one point, because he is 15 now, and he is getting close to, he's taller than his mom. And that was a big day. That was a real big day. They even have at one, they're almost the same height. There's a little thing where it says mom, and then another one where he's just right next to it. He's just a little bit, so.
So cool. Oh yeah, way up here.
Right, well, normally that would be hung like 20 inches off the floor, so that when you stood and you could just mark it, and that was the actual height. That one is just hanging willy-nilly anyway.
Yes.
And then, yeah, there are 2, the one that is behind, the one that is on top of the rug, and then next to it is one that is on a store canvas below, on top of the red rug. Those 2 are similar design. I painted the one that is on the canvas to the right of that. And then I came home from Sweden, and in order to get myself more familiar with the feel of the paints, the palette, what the colors would look like if you're using natural earth pigments, not in a tube, just powdered, and adding this glue to it, this melted glue. I wanted to familiarize myself with how it feels when you paint, how it works. And so I decided to do something I was familiar with, that I had done before. So I knew the strokes. I knew what similar ideas of color I wanted. So I kind of changed up the design a little, but used the same thing just to give myself a little familiarity with it. And it worked pretty good. The nice thing about the old pieces is that you can age them very, very easily.
Yeah.
They're not as long lasting, say, as the oil paints.
Sure.
And a stretched canvas. So you can see some little cracks and things where the paint wears. And so when they're not being hung up, you just roll them up. I put tissue paper between them and have a cardboard tube, and I wrap it around that cardboard tube so it's not folded.
Sure. Awesome.
And that's actually what yeah, that's how they used to store them, because they would only put these out for special occasions, like to celebrate a wedding or the birth or baptism of a child, Christmas, Easter, their big high holy days or big national celebrations. Midsummer, they would put them up, then have them up for a while, take them down, roll them up, and store them in their trunks.
That's awesome. Why don't let's talk about your wood stuff.
Okay, by Rose Molly.
Yes. What are some techniques that, we wouldn't really know about, I guess, on your bowls?
Well, when I'm doing the rose mulling, I'm using oils. And there are several different styles. Norway is divided up by its mountains into a lot of little valleys or bigger valleys. And back in the 1800s, it was hard to get from one valley to another because of the mountains separating them in the winter. So they were often very isolated. And things within that valley tended to become, I don't know what the word is. Everybody used the same ideas, the same designs. And so then you go to another valley and they had a completely different spin on it. So what we're seeing here is 2 or 3 Howendel pieces. This top plate is Rococo, which was very, very popular in the 17 and 1800s. And because many of the painters were former soldiers, and the government at that time did not do social welfare and social relief. So when they came home, if they were injured, they had to find a way to make a living. And a lot of them, if they could not farm, would turn to painting. But that plate is Rococo, and it has a gold leaf center, which was used especially if a wealthy client was willing to pay for the gold leaf.
Okay.
And then the one off to the very far right is a muskrat board.
Oh, yes.
And people say, well, yes, it's not a mink board. They were used by the trappers to stretch the skins after they trapped the animals and, and did whatever they did to prepare them as a hide. And so minks are similar to otters. They're long, slender animals. So a mink board is much longer and much thinner. A muskrat is a short, stocky animal. So the muskrat board is fatter and shorter. And so the head would have been at the top and the bottom would have been, the wider part would have been the rear of the animal when they hung them up.
And did you seen this before you painted it?
Oh, and then the other 2, one is Howendel and one is Valdres. And those are, you can use them for anything you want. I call them a wall pocket. They might have, I don't know if they specifically had a use back then, so it's not necessarily a traditional piece of woodenware. Sure. But somebody came up with them, and they're wonderful to paint. They're just fun to paint to me because they're not flat, sure. And they're not a bowl or a tray, and there's a lot of scope for using your imagination.
Yeah. Oh, we didn't look at your boxes over here.
Yes, my boxes. That is also Swedish, and it's called drickamalning. And the translation is, the malning, of course, is painting, and dricka in Swedish means drink or beverage. And you start with a powdered pigment, and you use either sour milk or beer as your medium, which is kind of fun. And it's basically finger painting. So the stacked 3 boxes in the back, you take the side of your hand and I went upside down like I turned it right side up when I was doing it, like a fan, as if it was a folded pleated fan.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, can you kind of see it? I love doing that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and they used them even on great big cupboards. As a matter of fact, the surprising thing, everybody thinks that the doll molding with the big curvets on the linen is the first Swedish folk art. But it's not. They had drought in Sweden back in the 1700s. I'm not quite sure what the dates were. Something like 1786 or something. And the king was in Stockholm and driving around his city, and he kept seeing all these beggars, and he didn't like seeing the beggars. So his idea of social welfare was to send out a proclamation to say that, and then they started decorating them using the sour milk because that was all they had, and the powdered pigments. And then later they added after they did the backgrounding and made this like a faux finish or finger painting, they added the flowers to decorate. So that's the original Swedish welfare. Go home and find something to make a living.
Yeah. Whatever you have, right?
Right, exactly. But that's what they did. They did whatever they had. And so you can start seeing on this one box to the right that has a little pull out. It was used to keep their caps the women wore.
Oh.
And I can't, yeah, there's a little a little leather pull, and you pull it and it slides out. Yeah. And they would keep their caps and maybe their jewelry in that.
Sure.
And there is a long spray of flowers on that. And so gradually morphed somehow into doing it on linen and the big curvets. That part they're not real clear on, but so this drickemolding comes first in the late 1700s. And then you get the emergence of doll molding. And about the same time as the doll molding, which is in central Sweden, the province of Dalarna, you have the Bonads tapestry paintings, which are in southern Sweden, also a very, very poor area because a lot of it was forest, marsh, and lake and swamp. So there was not good farming. There was excellent fishing. So.
Cool. I think
it's a lot of fun.
is gonna roll out here soon. I don't know. So these are for sale, right?
Most of them are, right. Of course, my growth chart is not. And one of the great big tapestry paintings is actually kind of, it was inspired by the things we did and the people we met when we were in Sweden, and we celebrated Midsummer Day with two of our mentors and our teachers. And so that's not for sale. And one of those wooden bowls, rose molding bowls, is actually a wedding gift for my niece, great niece. Yeah, she, that's how I sometimes determine what I'm going to paint. When it's a family wedding, they all want a painted item. So I send them some pictures and examples and say, okay, tell me what you like.
Yeah.
So then I go from there. So they tell me their favorite color, they tell me what style they like, and I go from there. So I painted the bowl, and her wedding was April, and of course nobody came. Mm-hmm. So the wedding celebration will be next April, and I'll give her the bowl then.
Perfect.
So those are three. I think it's three. There might be a fourth. Oh yeah, the fourth item is that little box that you pulled out with a leather tab, because that I did also while I was in Sweden under the guidance of a mentor. So those four. Any more questions, Montana?
Oh, I'm sure I could talk to you all day, but yeah. Thank you for doing this for us. We're glad we have this technology.
It was a lot of fun.
Yes.
Yeah, and
I'm grateful for our modern technology, but it's fun to go back and try and do something that's older.
yeah, yeah.
Okay?
Awesome.
Okay, have a great day and thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, bye.